Welcome to What's Your Next Move, the podcast for peak performers who are making things happen but are running into roadblocks that prevent them from getting what they want. Whether you work for someone else, you're an entrepreneur, thinking about starting your own business, or at a point in your life where you just can't make the move from where you are to where you want to go, you're in the right place. This podcast is all about answering one question: what's your next move? And helping you harness your power so your next move is the one that changes your life. I'm your host and resident provocateur, Arlene Battisil, and I want to know, what's your next move? Hi there, I'm Arlene Battisil, your host and resident provocateur, and I am thrilled to have my guest today, Joie Cheng, and she is the author of the book, The Naked Truth, A Woman's Journey to Self-Love. And I wanted to have Joie on the show today because she has a very, very compelling story from early on in her life, and to talk about how she went from those moments in her life to where she ultimately ended up today with this extraordinary book, the success of it, and everything that she has gone on to do as a result of the book, the kind of public speaking that she does, the coaching she does, and just all around, as she is known, the self-love transformation queen, and what that means for all of us. So Joie, thank you so very much for talking with me today. I know that you're busy, and I kept you waiting today for the start of our show, and so I'm so apologetic for that. So thank you for being so patient with me. So welcome.
Thank you, Arlene. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you for having me on your show.
Beautiful. Now, I had the pleasure of meeting Joie at an event that we both attended called the New Media Summit, where we were there to pitch influencers on podcasts to become guests or to find people that we would be able to interview for our own shows. And Joie had a very compelling pitch that she presented to this group of influencers and a crowd of about 200 people. And we all had notebooks in which to make our notes about everyone who was there at the event. And she was high on my list of people that I wanted to talk to based on the pitch that she made. So Joie, if you would, can you talk to me a bit about what you're doing right now and, where you're at in your life?
Sure, Arlene. So I am currently working with people that want to share their stories, that have a story that they believe the world needs to hear. So I help them write and publish their transformational books. And I also do speaking. I believe that part of my purpose is to share my story of how I was, when I was in my 20s, I went through a period of deep depression and suicidal thoughts, and self-love and living my purpose saved my life. And so I know that story can provide a lot of hope and healing for people and inspiration. And so that's part of my purpose as well. So I'm also, I know that there's going to be a podcast of my own in the near future, as well as a TED talk, working on getting that booked and working on getting published in, major magazines, and really just getting my message out to more people.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And so why don't we just go ahead and get right into how it is you've come to the place that you're at in your life right now. Can you walk me back in time? And I know some of the story because of what you shared at the event, but if you'd be kind enough, could you walk our listeners through what kind of things happened earlier on in your life that really changed the trajectory of your life? What were you doing? What was your normal at the time? And then what happened that created a whole new normal for you?
Yeah. So like I said, in my 20s, I went through, this period where I was really depressed and, considering killing myself. And it was obviously a really sad time, but it was also a very confusing time because there was nothing, I didn't understand why I was feeling that way. It wasn't like there had been something that had happened, I had gone through a traumatic breakup or had lost somebody close to me. My life was good on the outside. I had a good job and I had family and friends that cared about me, and I had, a relationship. I was in a relationship, and just everything seemed good in my life, but I was feeling this way. And nobody knew about it. I didn't tell anyone. I think I just mentioned it to my dad, after, I had gone through this. And it was like it went on for years. I don't remember exactly the point when it started or the point when it ended, but it was definitely something that happened for a long time. And I remember just, having a hard time getting out of bed, and I would cross this bridge on my way to work. And I would think about, what it would be like to jump off the bridge. And it was, it was really hard because even though like I had this thought that people didn't care about me, but I also knew that if I did kill myself, that my family would be really upset. And so that was what kept me from killing myself. But I felt like I was stuck because I didn't want to live, but I also couldn't die. And then I ended up in an abusive relationship. And so it was at that point when I realized that I didn't love myself, because I didn't know that I didn't love myself before that. But being in that relationship, I started thinking, well, I must not love myself, because if I did, I wouldn't be in this situation. I wouldn't continuously put myself in this situation. I was in that relationship for 4.5 years on and off. And, and then I ended up going to a seminar for my healing that I do with my clients. Sometimes it's called matrix energetics. It's a form of energy healing. And it was at that seminar that my mind started opening up to different possibilities. And, basically, I started questioning. I started realizing that there were certain beliefs that I had that were putting conditions on my own happiness. For example, I had a belief that, if I just got married, I'd be happier. Or if I was single, I'd be miserable. And so I started thinking to myself, well, how do I know that getting married is going to make me happier? There's probably a lot of married people that are not happy. Mm-hmm. There's a 50% divorce rate in the country, right? And I'm like, how do I know that being single is going to make me miserable? What if being single was the best thing that ever happened to me? So, by just like switching those beliefs, it created space for a different possibility. And it gave me the courage that, I needed to end that relationship. So I decided, okay, I need to end this relationship and I need to start learning to love myself. Mm-hmm. And then the universe started bringing opportunities into my life to support me, with that decision to love myself.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you were in the middle of the depression and the feeling that you didn't want to live, but you didn't want to die, and the feeling around not wanting to die being associated with how your family would feel in response, how did you manage to go for such a long period of time feeling the way that you were feeling? How did you manage to just get through each day?
I think because you just know that that's what you have to do, I suppose, because I was on my own. And so I had to go to my job and, support myself. And so I just went through it. And, I tried all these things to be happier, like I was trying to work out. And I don't know, it's like what I realized though is that, I heard someone say that depression is anger turned inwards. Mm-hmm. And so, I didn't know at the time that I was angry at myself because I was projecting it to other people. Like I thought other people didn't care about me. And I think that's probably a common belief with people that are depressed. And that's why, some people do kill themselves because they don't think anybody really cares. Mm-hmm. And they don't realize the impact that has, and I truly believe that everybody that decides to kill themselves, it's not only a loss to the people that know them, but it's a loss to the people that never got to know them, because I believe all of us have a sacred purpose, a reason that we're here. And if we don't, live that out, then the whole world suffers,
Right.
Especially if we don't share that in the form of a book, because that book will outlive us and then our impact is like goes on forever, and so that's why I'm so passionate about what I do, because I believe that we all have a unique story that other people need to hear.
Right. And when you just talked about depression being anger turned inward, and that you said that you were feeling that no one cared about you and that you were turning that anger inward, was there something that was happening in your life that you would have had a legitimate reason for being angry at other people? Were there things happening that would have, provoked that anger, but that you were not allowed to or didn't feel you could express that anger? And as a result, that got turned inward on you?
I don't think so. Other than obviously being in that abusive relationship, it was in a way, thankfully, it was only emotionally abusive at the time, although I know that it can start out that way. So although that can also be the most long-term damaging,
Yes, of course.
But yeah, it was emotionally abusive. My partner was emotionally abusive towards me. And, and I actually, that relationship, I went from being really angry when I broke up with him because I didn't really want to break up with him. And, it might sound weird because obviously it wasn't healthy, but I didn't really want to break up with him, but he stopped. He just wouldn't respond to my text messages and calls. And so I'm like, I guess I just have to break up with him. And I felt angry at the time, but then I was able to shift into gratitude, like complete gratitude for the experience. And I don't have any anger towards him anymore. And that relationship was truly one of the greatest gifts because he introduced me to my, form of energy healing that I do, and realizing that I am a healer. And I believe we all are healers. We all have the ability to heal ourselves and to heal other people. And we all have psychic abilities. And, just some of us are as developed in those gifts. And he opened me up to vegan and raw food and all these things that I didn't know about. And so he was really a gift in my life. And I think the biggest gift was learning to love myself, was realizing that I needed to love myself, and that really put me on the course that I'm on, where I realized that self-love is what I'm here to teach and embody. And that's what, I realized that I needed to share when I wrote my book. And then actually through writing my book was when I realized that, I'm here to help other people to share their story, because I kind of joke that I fell into book publishing. It wasn't something that I thought would happen, that I expected to happen. But, when I look back on my life, storytelling actually has been the theme of my life. It's something that I've always been interested in, because when I was a kid, I used to ask people what they did for a living. And it didn't really matter if they said they were a doctor or lawyer. I didn't really care so much about what they did as much as I cared about why they decided to be a doctor, be a lawyer. There's a story behind that.
What's the story?
Yeah. Oh, and then when I was at my first job, really kind of the only job I've had, but before I started my business, I worked at Big Brothers Big Sisters, which is a mentoring program for kids. And my job was when I first started, my job was to interview the volunteers and the families that wanted to be in the program, and, make sure that they were good candidates for a program and then match them up. And so what I loved about that job was getting to meet everybody and learning about their life. I mean, I would literally spend an hour and a half, 2 hours with them. There were 16 pages of questions. We had very thorough interviews and got to know everything about their life. And I love that. So it's interesting how, looking back, I realized that that's been the theme of my life.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting that you would have chosen that given how you were feeling. And did you feel like throughout your life, this feeling that was sort of with you for an extended period of time throughout your life, that you connecting or the feeling that you had that was associated with being depressed and really not wanting to live, did you feel that your work with the Big Sisters organization was something that allowed you to access a part of yourself emotionally that you were not able to access otherwise?
I don't really think so, to be honest. But yeah, I think that, I got my degree. I have a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in social work. And since I was a kid, I wanted to have my own business. But I thought I was going to be a family and marriage therapist, like a private therapist. Because my parents got divorced when I was a kid, between 8 and 10. And so we saw different family therapists as part of our divorce process. So that introduced me to sort of the world of, therapy. And so I got to see, people working from home, and, this other woman had this nice office in Manhattan, and I thought, wow, she must make a lot of money. And I thought, oh, it's, you get paid to talk to people or listen to their problems. It didn't seem like a hard thing to do. I'm like, oh, that's easy. I could do that, But as a kid, I just also, I don't know. I don't know if it sounds, I tell people maybe it sounds cheesy, but I always knew I was here for something bigger than myself. I don't know how many kids know that, but I just had this, I knew that I wasn't here just to make lots of money and have lots of fun. Even though there's nothing wrong with that, but I just knew that I was here for something greater, for something that would really make a big difference in the world.
Right. Got it. And then as you came out of that relationship, and I'm curious about something about this guy that you were with. And that is, if he had introduced you to raw foods and other things that would suggest some degree of enlightenment on his part, how would you explain how he ends up being someone who's emotionally abusive?
Yeah, well, so that was, I mean, honestly, I believe that when we're in a relationship with somebody, we both choose to be in that relationship, right? And there's gifts for both of us if you're willing to look at them. And so for him, he actually found out while we were together that his mom abused him as a kid. He had no idea because he was like under a year old, and his mom threw him against a wall as a baby.
Yikes.
And then also, you know, he had experiences with other women that weren't very positive. You know, he talked about how women would go on a date with him, and then when the bill would come, you know, if they had dinner together and the bill would come, they would leave. Like they just used him for a meal. And so thankfully, when I was in that situation with him, I knew that it wasn't about me. Like I felt that, you know, because whatever I had said or done, I didn't feel like the response that he gave me really like warranted what I had done or said, you know? And so thankfully I had that awareness, because I think that, you know, women and even men in those situations can blame themselves, right? They can think, oh, I did something wrong, and, you know, there's something wrong with me, and like really internalize it. And I think that's when it becomes really like damaging, when we believe that there's something wrong with us because of the way someone else is treating us, you know?
Right.
And so, yeah, so I had that awareness. So that's what helped me, was realizing, okay, I know this isn't about me. So.
Well, how is it that you managed to have the perspective you did, which is what you were just talking about, that this was not about you? Because for most people, especially for women, they will automatically take responsibility for whatever is being thrown at them, literally or figuratively. But you were in a situation with someone who was behaving in an abusive way towards you, but you had the perspective that this wasn't about you. How did you end up having that perspective? Did you always have that perspective while you were with him, or is this something that developed over time throughout the course of that relationship?
You know, I felt like I always had that perspective. I think that I don't know, I just was thinking about it and felt like it just didn't match up, you know, like what I had said or done, and didn't match how he was responding to me. And so I felt like, you could call it, you know, intuition as well. And I think that, you know, as women, I mean, even men, you know, we all have that. We have intuition, right? But a lot of times we don't listen to it because our mind like yells at us, whereas our intuition whispers, right? So
yeah, for sure.
We have to be like able to quiet the mind, which, you know, is really difficult to do. And that's where meditation can help. And, you know, finding just stillness, times where, you know, we're not just running around doing things, but we actually have time for those whispers, for us to hear those whispers.
Right, for sure. Now, I know that you lost your parents at a fairly young age. And where was that in relation to when you were in this particular relationship? You were in your 30s, right, when you lost your parents? Is that right?
Actually, well, so my mom, I lost my mom first, and I was 27 when she passed, and then I was 31 when my dad passed.
Right. And where were you in terms of chronology, in terms of this relationship relative to when you lost your parents?
Yeah, so I was between 25 and 29 when I was in that abusive relationship. So actually my mom passed during that time. And so we dated for about 8 months. And then we broke up. He broke up with me, and he told me that he had been dating another woman at the same time as me, like pretty much the entire time, like started dating both of us at the same time. And I had actually had suspicions, and I had actually questioned him, and he had denied it. And at one time I was at his place, probably, I don't know, 2-3 months into a relationship or something. And, you know, I'd asked him if I could check my email. And he said, sure. And he was laying down on the couch. He was kind of tired. And so I went on his computer. And, you know, if you have Gmail, like if you don't sign out of your Gmail, then when somebody types in Gmail to go on, you know, then it shows up their email, right? So he had Gmail and I had Gmail. And so I was on Gmail. And so his email, popped up, and honestly, like I didn't think I would see anything. I didn't really want to see anything, but I just happened to see like a conversation, between him and this woman. And, he was like, "Hey baby." And I'm like, okay, what do I do here? So that was the first time that I had ever, been cheated on. And I had actually had this thought that like I would never get cheated on. And what I've learned is you should never say never. 'Cause, it's like, and I also realized that, I talk about this in my book, but it's not about, I don't believe that when someone cheats on you, it's not about you, it's about them, right?
Yeah,
they're not getting
of course.
a relationship. And so, so then I like woke him up. I was like, "Hey," I said something like, I don't know, like, "Is there anything you want to tell me?" And then I asked him about it, and he's like, "Oh, well, that's like an ex of mine that I work with. And so, I have to like be nice to her." And I'm thinking, well, like, there's a difference between like, you can be nice without calling someone like baby,
Yeah, that crosses the line a bit.
Yeah. So like, he's like, "Okay." And I don't know. And then and then it's just like, I just felt like it didn't stop. But I was afraid of, so I had this pattern of being in relationships and not being happy, like being in long-term relationships and not being happy, but not ending the relationships, because I had this fear of being alone. Mm-hmm. And I also had this fear of being abandoned by men, which, was because of my childhood. There was a time when my parents were going through that divorce where there was a lot of yelling between them. And one time my mom called the police and had them take my dad, like had my dad leave the house. Right. And I was a daddy's girl, like complete daddy's girl, always really close to my dad. And so, I remember that incident. I don't remember what I was thinking, but I can only imagine, as a little girl who's like 8 or 9, like thinking that, like, is my dad going to come back? Like, Did I do something wrong? And I didn't know that I had that fear of being abandoned until I got into relationships with men when I was a lot older, right? And I started realizing like, I have this fear of like, being left and then, and so, and then when I got in an abusive relationship and I made that decision that I needed to learn to love myself, I also decided I needed to learn to just be happy being single, because I had gone from one relationship to another and hadn't been single, since I had started dating.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I just want to ask you one more question before we move on to the next step in your journey and what your next move was. You were in this relationship around the same time that your mother passed away. Mm-hmm. And how did that all play itself out in the context of the relationship? Because, when we're facing the loss of a parent in particular, it just brings up all kinds of emotions. And when we're in a relationship with someone, there tends to be a way that we need to rely on them and depend on them for emotional support as we're going through an experience like that. And so how did that fit into this whole equation of your life at that time?
Yeah. So what had happened, like I was saying, so he he broke up with me. Like, I think it was New Year's. I feel like it was New Year's Eve or the day before New Year's Eve.
God.
Yeah. Okay. So, but then we ended up actually spending New Year's Eve together. It was kind of weird. But he broke up with me and he told me that he had been cheating on me. And then like the next day I found out my mom had cancer. So talk about a really shitty couple days, right?
Yeah. Happy New Year.
Right. And, and it was really pretty unexpected. I mean, my mom, I guess, had been going through some stuff for, I don't know, maybe 4 months or something, but my sister knew more about it because they talked, more regularly. I wasn't that close to my mom. She, we thought like it was her blood pressure medication because she had high blood pressure. And so they were going back and forth trying to, take care of this thing. And then, but we had no idea that it was going to be cancer. There was no history of cancer in her family.
Wow.
And, she was 54, maybe 53, because she was 54 when she passed. So yeah, I mean, she was really young and, she would work out and do aerobics and, she cooked at home. She ate pretty healthy. So it was just really unexpected. Right. But honestly, I think that if my mom maybe hadn't had cancer, maybe we would have stayed broken up. But we did stay broken up for a couple months, but we were in touch because of what had happened with my mom. And he actually was really supportive of the whole thing, like of me being there to take care of my mom. Like I was the one that was taking care of her and I had to readjust my life a little bit. Like I was
Right.
grateful that I had a job that was flexible. So I would spend half the week at her place in the suburbs, living with her and taking care of her. And then I would spend half of the week at my place. I had a place, I grew up in Chicago, so I had a place in the city, and I would, I had to do some stuff for work in the office, but I had flexibility to do some stuff at home too. So I would rearrange it so that I could spend half the time with my mom and half the time, in the city at my place and with my boyfriend and with my friends and my job. And that was actually really good for me because my sister had suggested maybe I should move back in with, our mom to take care of her. And I was glad that I decided to keep my place in the city because it was like I needed that balance. I needed to have like the respite care, of my boyfriend and my friends, so that I could show up more fully for my mom when I was there,
Yeah. And so as we fast forward 4 years, were you still in that relationship at the point that your dad passed?
No, like I said, so I, ended that relationship when I was 29.
Okay.
So it was, my mom passed in the middle of that relationship. So and I think that, like I said, he was actually really supportive and he was there when I found out my mom passed. It was a really interesting experience because it was ironic that I was the one that was there at the beginning and took my mom to the hospital. And, I have 2 siblings, a sister and a brother, and they weren't there. Well, my sister, because she was in California and she ended up moving back to Chicago while her mom was sick to be there. And so I was the one that was there like the whole time taking care of her. My sister did the best she could, but she had her own family. And my brother, I don't know, he's just, didn't seem like he wanted to be there as much or something. I don't know what his deal was, but he wasn't around as much as I was. And but then when she actually passed, I wasn't there. I had seen her the night before, and the nurse had told us that she would probably have a few more weeks, but she passed in less than a week. And so if I had known, I would have been there. And, but the last memory I had was a really beautiful memory where we were all at my sister's house and we had just convinced my mom to move in with our sister because she had a lot of resistance. I think she just wanted to be at her own house.
Sure.
But my sister's my sister worked from home and her husband worked from home. So they would always be around, and I still had my job where I had to come into the city sometimes. So I was thinking about taking a leave of absence, because that last week my mom couldn't do anything by herself. I was doing everything for her. I was helping her brush her teeth. I was helping her, she had a toilet right by her bed downstairs, and she really couldn't do anything. So I realized maybe, we need to look at what we can do here, because she needs more support than she had needed before. And so, we try to convince her to move in with my sister. And it's kind of funny because I told them the story and they were like, well, obviously your mom didn't want to live with your sister because after she moved in, she passed the next day. And I mean, it might sound funny, but I think my mom, she's just a very simple person. And my sister had these she has TiVo, she has complicated TV controls. And I think he was like, well, I don't know how to use your TV. My sister was like, we'll teach you how to use the TV. Stuff. But I don't know, maybe she just wanted to be in her own house, But
sure.
I convinced her to move in with our sister. And that night we had a really great time because my sister had just bought some new clothes for my niece, who was almost, I think she was a year old, a little over a year or something. And then my brother had just come back from a trip to the Greek islands, so he was showing us pictures. And so it was just a really nice experience. And I kind of remember thinking, oh, I kind of wish I could just stay here, but I had a work event the next day. And so I was like, okay, well, I got to go back to the city and that night. And it was interesting because I always said, I love you to my mom when I would leave her and give her a kiss. And for some reason, I think I was a little embarrassed because my sister and my brother were there. It might sound weird, but I didn't tell her that. And then that was the last time I saw her. But then the next day, I got a call from my sister. It was 11 a.m., but we had been out late the night before, so I was still sleeping, and she left a message saying, hey, give me a call when you wake up. We got to talk about some stuff with our mom. I'm thinking, okay. And then my brother calls at 2 p.m. and I'm still in bed, and he's like, get back here as soon as you can. We don't think mom has much time left now. And so I like jump out of bed and start getting ready. And like in less than 15 minutes, like after that, he calls me back and says she's gone. Oh. I'm just like, what? And so then they're like, well, take your time. You don't have to rush back. And they're like, are you okay to drive? Because it's a 45-minute drive. And I was like, I think so. I don't know. I guess I'll let you know if I can. I mean, I just was like, not really thinking that, about stuff. Just in like kind of shock around, her actually just being gone that fast. But my boyfriend was there. Like I was at his place when I found out. Right. And he didn't come to the funeral because my family, I didn't tell them that I actually was still dating him because I think I was ashamed, because I knew that if I told them, they'd be like, why are you with this guy? Because of the way that he's treating you. Right. So like they didn't even know. I mean, I think they knew, but I didn't tell them, I think they had the suspicions and right. knew that I was still with him, but I didn't tell them that I was with him. So he didn't even come to the funeral. But he actually was really great about the whole experience of my mom being sick. And he was there like for me during that time. Mm-hmm. So I honestly think that for him, it was about like, he just isn't really meant to be in a monogamous relationship. I think he is the type of person that would do better in an open or a, poly relationship. Mm-hmm. Because, he said that he really appreciated and enjoyed our companionship. But there was the other woman that he was with, like the sex was like, they had more like chemistry there. But then he like couldn't really talk to her. They didn't really have a lot in common to talk about. Right. And so it was like it was a challenge for him to choose because we both had different, I guess, pros, and yeah, I think some people, I'm like, okay, well and I talk about being in an open versus a closed like relationship in my book as well. But I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think that it's just knowing what's right for you, right. And it's like, okay, well, that's fine. But if that's what you wanted to do, you should have been honest with us at the beginning. You should have at least said, hey, here's the deal. I'm dating you and I'm dating this other woman. And like, is that okay with you? And if not, then we get to decide, right? Versus like not knowing. So.
Yeah. And he didn't, honor the fact that you should have been able to make that decision yourself. And if he was living in his own truth about that he needed to be in a non-monogamous relationship, then put that right out there and let people make the decision for themselves. Because I agree with you. There's no right or wrong around, a monogamous or an open or poly relationship, whatever it is that makes the most sense for you. That is what it needs to be, and that may change over time, but at least you have to allow the people that you're getting involved with the choice to decide whether or not they want to be involved with you, because if you're not coming clean about the fact that this is what you're doing, then that constitutes mm-hmm. cheating and an affair when it doesn't have to be characterized that way if you were just honest about it in the first place. So, but I think most people are afraid to even have that kind of conversation, but the flip side of that is, yeah, you're afraid to have the conversation because it then means that you don't get to have what you want. And so you'd rather lie and get what you want than just be, forthright about it and let the other person make a decision. So, yeah, I think he revealed his true colors in that for mm-hmm. sure. Well, you know what? I want to, there's a million other questions that I would want to ask you about so many things that you've said here. And of course, there is mm-hmm. the passing of your father. And I don't want to gloss over that because certainly that was, I'm sure, a pivotal moment in your life. But I know that you're short on time, and I want to move to the part of our conversation that is about the book. And let me ask you how it is that this book even came into being.
Yeah, so, I know that there's probably a lot of people that have always wanted to write a book. That wasn't actually me. I never thought of writing a book. If you asked me 5 years ago if I was going to write a book, I probably would have said no. But it was like the end of 2014. Yeah, towards the end of 2014 that I went to an event and I heard this speaker. His name's James McNeil, and he is, an author, speaker, coach, and travels around. And he was speaking about how when we die, if we don't write our story down, it gets lost in the world forever. Mm-hmm. And that, nobody could write our story the way that we would, that could share it the way we would. So it really just it touched me a lot and just made me start thinking about, this idea of a legacy and like, what is it that I want to leave behind? And so then I said, okay, so May 15th, 2015, I thought 51515 would be a cool date to have my book done. And so I put it on my Google Calendar, and you know what happened? The day came and went, and I didn't do anything. I hadn't started it. I saw the date. I'm like, oh, I was going to have my book done by this date. Okay. And then so last year I did the same thing. I was like, okay, so July 17th, 2017, 71717. I'm like, this is the date. And I put it on my calendar again. But this time I actually hired an editor. So I made a big financial investment, and as well as an investment in my time to make sure that it would actually get done. And I had a bunch of support around me, and it took me 3 months to write my book. And that wasn't really planned, but it was the time that I had just decided. I hired my editor. It was 3 months, before that. And so there we go. And so my first, intention with my book was really to share my story, was to, I knew that my story was going to be about self-love. I didn't know exactly what my book was going to look like, but that was a process that just evolved over time as I went through the process. Mm-hmm. And then my second intention was I wanted people to be inspired to share their story. I didn't want it to be a book where they just read it and then put it down and are like, okay, well, that was a good story. That was cool, but they don't actually do anything with it. I wanted them to say, wow, I have things that I've gone through that could help somebody else, and wisdom that I've learned. And so, they want to share their story. And then my third intention was to use it as a tool to grow my business. So at the time I was working with women, and I've done women's circles and coaching, and I, was working with women to help them love themselves so they could live their best life, and reach out to me like acquaintances, say, hey, I have this event coming up. I'd love to have you speak, and this is what I'm here to do, which is really cool because I knew I had thought that that's what I was here to do, but public speaking terrifies me, like most people. It's the number one fear. They say that we're more afraid of being the person giving the speech at a funeral than the person that's actually, in the coffin, which is really crazy. And so that is a big part of my purpose. And I got that, confirmation at that book launch, which was really cool.
Beautiful. And so you basically have parlayed the telling of your story into a whole new career for yourself. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, it's dual purpose, like I said. So I've got the two. I've got one purpose where I believe I'm here, and I think that they are they're connected and combined. But the first purpose, one of them, is to share my story. Because I know that there are people who are going through depression and who are considering killing themselves right now, right? And I know that I had checked the suicide rate. This was in 2016, so I haven't seen what it was like last year, but I know in 2016 that the suicide rate between girls 10 to 14 had tripled, which is crazy. And so, so that's also a big part of my purpose, is to share my story in schools and just everywhere, to be able to provide healing and hope for people, to know that, for me, I didn't do any therapy, I didn't take any medication, and I was able to heal myself. And it's something that, it is an ongoing journey. I'm not going to say that I've never had those thoughts again, but when those thoughts do come up, it's there's no energy behind them. It's, I might have a thought oh, maybe I should kill myself. And then a second later, I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. And so there's just no behind it. And I think that, like I said, somebody had said that anger or depression is anger turned inwards. So to me, then that makes sense that self-love is kind of the antidote for that, but I didn't know that at the time. It was after, it was kind of looking back and realizing oh, well, that's why, I think when I learned to love myself, that it really helped me. And that's obviously an ongoing process as well. But I think it's both. It's the self-love and the living your purpose, because, there's people that may love themselves, but if they don't know what they're here to do and they're not doing that, then maybe that also can make you depressed,
Sure.
But I think it is both, because I was on, Reinvention Radio with Steve and his crew a few weeks ago, and we were talking about oh, well, do you think it's because he thinks, when people are depressed, they're focusing so much on themselves that they really need to focus on other people, and I was like, well, I think it's both, because in my experience, it was both, because I know that there are people out there who seem like they're on their purpose and then they do kill themselves too. And so then you wonder, famous people where you're like, wow, this person, I know there was this Tantra teacher and she was really having a huge impact in the world. And you're like, why would she, kill herself? And
Yeah.
and people that have, success, that they're like, celebrities, they have all this money and all, they can do anything. And yet you're like, well, why would they do that? And like, we don't know. The truth is, we don't know what's going on in people's heads, right? Like, that's why it's called the silent killer, because a lot of people just don't talk about it. And especially, I think if you're in like that light where people look up to you, and, it's hard to admit that you're struggling, I think. So that's probably why, like, we just don't know what was really going on.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. Well, Joy, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I really appreciate you being so forthright and honest about your own experience and what you went through in the relationship that was not very productive for you in one way, but ultimately very productive in what it taught you and what you walked away with. And just where you're at in your life right now, in the way that you're able to help so many people with the story that you've told, and that hopefully it will stimulate other people to begin telling their own story, because it is through our stories that we learn from one another, and we learn those things that can enable us to make different decisions in our lives, especially ones that involve what we're going to do about whether or not we choose to live. And so I thank you so very much for this. And, before we wrap it up, I would like to ask you one thing, especially since you are so acutely familiar with this. And that is, for a lot of my listeners, they may be at a point in their life where they're really struggling in their business or in their personal life or their relationship, or something's going on where they are despairing. And, based on your own experience, is there anything that you might share, any insights or takeaways that you've had from your own life that you might share with them that might enable them to feel that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that they can have a perspective that this is not going to go on forever? Do you have any thoughts about that you'd care to share?
Sure. So I would say, I have, these practices that I share in my book. There's 7 practices that help me cultivate a deep sense of self-love. And one of them I actually already shared, which was, I call it like a super like ninja mind Jedi trick. And it's called like how do you shift a belief from a limiting belief to an empowering belief, right? So I already explained that, where you take a belief that you have that's limiting you, and you ask yourself, how do I know? And then you ask yourself, like, how do I know that this belief is true? And the cool thing is, you don't have to have an answer to that question when you ask it right away. But just by asking the question, it shifts that energy, and then the answer will come to you. And so that's a really simple but powerful practice that if you're struggling right now, you can ask yourself, well, how do I know that this belief that I have? How do I know that I have this this belief that I can't be successful in business, or that I can't find love, or whatever it is that you're struggling with? Like, how do I know that that's true? And then another practice is gratitude. That's something that we hear a lot, but it really does make a difference. Especially, I know for me, when I was feeling depressed, like, I was really focusing on what I didn't have in my life, or what I wanted to be different, right, versus what I actually do have. And so when I started focusing on what I'm grateful for, and I actually joined a Facebook group called What Am I Grateful For Today? And I would post something in that group every day and write in my journal every day something I was grateful for. And, that over time, that shifts your, mind, because you start focusing on what you do have. And then the universe can give you more because you're grateful, because everything is energy, right? So, and if you do that at night, then I recommend doing it at night, because then that your mind is going to be looking for something to be grateful for during the day. So it will like subconsciously be, looking for that. And so, and the truth is, we always have something to be grateful for, no matter what's going on. Like, we're grateful that we have a roof over our head, or we have food to eat, or we have clothes, like the basics that, a lot of people in the world don't actually have.
Right.
So just like really, that's really powerful as well.
Right. And it's a beautiful way to end and start a day, where if at the end of your day, when you're really struggling, and you're thinking about what you're grateful for, it sends you off into sleep in a state that allows you to wake up in a place where you are feeling grateful. even if you're not actively aware of it, but it certainly changes the way the brain is functioning. And that's really critical, especially in situations where people are struggling, because our emotions can produce thoughts that are really counterproductive for us, and we can totally go off the rails as a result. So I think that's really, really helpful advice. And I thank you so much for that. And Joy, for our listeners, would you be kind enough to share with them if they're interested in learning more about you or taking advantage of what you have to offer or getting a copy of your book? Can you let them know where they can find you?
Yeah, so the best place is to go to my website, which is joiecheng.com, and that's JOIECHENG.com.
Oh, beautiful. And they can also find you on social media, I'm sure.
Yeah, and actually, if you go to my site, I have a free gift there, so you can sign up for my 7-day self-love challenge, and you'll get an email every day for 7 days with a different self-love practice. And I shared, a couple of them on this in our interview, but there's like 5 more that I didn't share. So you can, find out what those are, and you can also get a copy of my book on the site as well. And if you're interested, if you think that you might be interested in writing a book or finding out if you do have a book inside of you, if there's a story inside of you that, needs to be shared, I'd love to get on the phone with you so you can set up a complimentary clarity breakthrough call on my site as well.
Beautiful. How lovely. Well, Joy, this has been really wonderful. And again, I thank you so much for being so generous with the sharing of your story and your own journey. I think it's going to be really helpful to a lot of people, and also just giving them the idea that writing a book and telling their story is actually a really good thing to do, because it is part of all of our legacy. And who wants to leave this earth without letting people know that we were here? So thank you so much for joining me today, Joy.
Thank you again for having me, Arlene.
And so, as always, at the end of our episode, I ask you to think about your life and ask yourself the question, what's your next move? I'm Arlene Battisil. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll be back with another episode. Welcome to What's Your Next Move, the podcast for peak performers who are making things happen but are running into roadblocks that prevent them from getting what they want. Whether you work for someone else, you're an entrepreneur, thinking about starting your own business, or at a point in your life where you just can't make the move from where you are to where you want to go, you're in the right place. This podcast is all about answering one question: what's your next move? And helping you harness your power so your next move is the one that changes your life. I'm your host and resident provocateur, Arlene Battisil, and I want to know, what's your next move?